And I've got the timer here for you folks as well.
Perfect.
All right. Alrighty, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Bear, and I'm an event facilitator here with McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninilok, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And of course, we're gathered here today for the Winnipeg launch of James Duthie's Certified Beauties, more of hockey's greatest untold stories. Here we are. Yes, applause. And a big thanks to James' publisher as well, HarperCollins Canada, and to the Illegal Curve hockey team for coming on board to co-present and host this evening. Let's get a round of applause for them as well. So after an introduction, a few words from James and a conversation. If time permits, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you do have a question tonight, just raise your hand enough for our panelists to see you, and then we'll just point over to you to ask your question, and then that question will be answered. And of course, I'll be at the end to review how signing procedure will go, which of course will take place to the right of our cash desk. But for now, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing tonight's hosts. Illegal Curve Hockey is an independent sports media company founded in 2007 with credentialed access to Winnipeg Jets and Manitoba Moose precedents, practices, and games. Their mission is to provide unparalleled coverage of hockey-related news in Manitoba on their website. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show airs every Saturday from 9 a.m. until 11 a.m. as they spend almost 2 hours focused on the Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose, as well as prospects playing in various other leagues. The show began on Red River Radio back in 2009, moved to Sports Radio 1290, which became TSN 1290 until February 2021, before transitioning to YouTube. With the move to YouTube, they also added the Illegal Curve post game, which goes live following every single Winnipeg Jets game. And here to host the event, please join me in welcoming the Illegal Curve team, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and Drew Mindell.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. This is fantastic turnout. I'm just going to move this back just a little bit. There we go. I think that's a little bit better. We're good? Perfect. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. As I mentioned, I am Drew Mindell. I'm the host of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Ezra Ginsburg on my immediate left. Dave Minuk on my far left. The three of us broadcast on a regular basis Saturday mornings and again after each and every Winnipeg Jets game. The man on my right, which is the opposite of one of his books, which was the man on my left, right?
Well, no, technically it's the way the audience sees me.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But
I am on the left to them, right?
Okay, yeah, the man on the left. I guess if you were watching on TV, that would make sense. Anyways, the man on my right, your left, is James Duthie. He covers hockey as well as the Grey Cup, the Super Bowl, the Masters on TSN. James's work has earned him multiple awards, including 7 Canadian Screen Awards. What is that worth financially?
Nothing. As a matter of fact, they make you buy the trophy, I think. So I'm on about $300.
And the Excellence in Sports Broadcasting Award from Sports Media Canada. His best-selling books include Beauties, The Day I Almost Killed 2 Gretzky's, not 1, but 2, and the guy on the left. James Duthie lives in Aurora, Ontario, but at heart, I'm sure, is a Winnipegger. Am I right about
Absolutely.
that? Okay, there you go.
I don't say that in every single city that I live in.
Good answer. Good
I'm
answer.
like the band guys, you know.
Winnipeg, I've never been to the better town. You think they know how to rock in Saskatoon, but in Winnipeg, that's really where they know how to rock. When was the last time you were here? Before this weekend, of course. You're here for the Grey Cup that's coming up on Sunday. There's, I was asked, we had O-Dog on, Jeff O'Neill, who's of course, everybody knows him from his TSN.
Jets playoffs, I just can't remember which one.
17, 18 probably?
Definitely I was here when they played Vegas in the Western Conference Final.
Yeah,
What was that?
That was 18, 17, 18.
But I think I've been here since for one game. I just can't remember what it was.
Okay, well,
I'm the worst guy ever for dates. Which probably means I should be writing books. But anyway.
That's okay. So let's talk about the book. There's going to be a free-flowing conversation. I'll let everybody know. It's going to go in probably a bunch of different areas, but that's okay. James said that the world is our oyster when it comes to this conversation. Well,
let me, before you start,
okay,
I just want to say again, thank you guys all for coming. I know it's Friday night. I know it's Grey Cup week. You could be a million different places, so it means a ton for me to come, for you guys to come out here. second of all, thanks to these three guys, because I'm fully aware that some of you probably just came to see them, not me. So it's very kind of Drew and Dave and Ezzy to do this for me. So, and as far as the book signing goes, I'll stay and sign everybody's personally after. Like I said, if somebody has to go, when we're done the talk, just maybe run up to me and I'll make sure it happens if you have to leave. But yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
There you go. I was going to say, so why now? Why is now the time for sort of another rendition of Certified
Needed the money.
Beauties?
Needed the money.
Okay, good answer. So about that. The Screen Awards. You have another one coming up. You have to write a check for it.
No, so I wrote Beauties, and I don't know, any of you read Beauties? So I wrote Beauties during COVID, and my idea was just to write a book that was only great stories. I was saying this to Drew the other day, that I'd read some hockey books, you know, biographies, which are great, but sometimes they have 2 or 3 good stories in them, and then the rest of it is, I was born in a small Manitoba town and all that stuff. And I said, what if you could cut that out and just write great stories? Because, you know, I found my enjoyment in the business over the years, hosting the panel with all these ex-players and ex-coaches. You get a lot of time to sit around and talk while you're watching games, and they always have amazing stories. And I guess I'm a storyteller at heart. So the always thing that I ask the guys is, we're sitting down in a bar, and I said, just tell me your favorite story from your career. And that's kind of what the book was. And I didn't intend to write a sequel, but I had so many people, hockey players or through the grapevine, come up to me afterwards and said, man, if I knew you were writing this book, I would have told you, you have to talk to this guy. This guy's got an unbelievable story, or this guy's got an unbelievable story. And so I heard enough of those that I figured it was time to do a sequel.
Good answer. You know, makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of great stories out there in this game. You know, I'm sure that's just, you know, scratching the surface regarding those stories. Is that yours?
It's a big fine on the back.
Okay. Somebody at the board. Hold on me.
Torts would yell at me.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, you know, you mentioned Torts. So, you know, yesterday, you know, with Brooksy passing away, Larry Brooks, who of course is a Hockey Hall of Fame journalist, just renowned in the hockey community, and their head-to-head battles are legendary. And I think, and I'm sure you saw the clip of John Tortorella speaking on ESPN about the passing of Larry Brooks. You know, we, you know, in the public, and you know, those of us in the media, you know, we see one side of John Tortorella. Take us behind the curtain.
Yeah.
You know, when you're sitting on the panel, when you're watching the game with him, you know, what are you seeing, even from Tortorella or any number of different players who've crossed your paths over the years?
Torts was by far the least enthusiastic panelist we ever had. By the way, one more thing on Larry Brooks. You know, I feel bad in a way that so many people only know him for those exchanges with Torts, and it was great what Torts said about him. He was a really nice guy, and I only got to know him in the last few years. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame at a luncheon that I was hosting, and I told the story, which he always brought up after. He loved, my wife's name is Cheryl Brooks, and I call her Brooksy. Anybody who ever listens to my podcast, right? I call her Brooksy. And so whenever we get in some sort of little tiff about something, and she says, what are you saying there? I always say, I guess that's what I'm saying, Brooksy. And she has no idea what I'm talking about, but I think it's the funniest thing in the world. Torts, when he joined us, I think he was out to prove that he was the opposite of everything we thought of him. He appeared only in those SportsCenter top 10 lists, the exchange with Brooksy, all his yelling at the podium and so on and so forth, all these little clips. And I think I don't think he only went on TV to prove that he wasn't that kind of guy.
Soften his image.
Yeah, like people remember him as being pretty good because, you know, he would say, I hate the quiz and things like that, but he really wasn't a good analyst because he didn't really want to say anything about anybody, but he was great to hang around with. But he hated being on, I've never met someone who was on TV who hated being on TV. One night we were sitting around, we were eating pizza, watching the game. He's like, guys, man, I love this. I love sitting around with you guys, talking hockey, eating pizza. I just wish we didn't have to do the TV part. And I was like, well, Torts, that's kind of the only reason you're actually here. Like, we're actually here, but I'm still good friends with the man. Every time I write him something, like if he gets fired from a job or hired from a job and I wish him well, he always writes back, the quiz sucks. That's the only thing he ever writes.
You know, at least it's authentic in that sense, yeah. Right? You know what to expect. As I'm hogging the mic time, and that's not good for anybody.
We're used to you hogging the mic. Anybody who's listened to a legal career knows you always talk.
I try not to, but you know.
I wanted to ask you, James, about what the process of writing the book is, because it's a unique book in the sense that you've got dozens of stories Like, how did they materialize? Like, is this something that you've got kind of the ideas and you've got parts of the stories and then you complete them? Like, and how long was the process putting the second book
The whole
together?
thing, it takes a year probably, I would say, from like genesis of the idea to actually seeing it in print and being here with you guys. It's a little all over the map. In some cases, like I said, somebody will tell me about a story. For instance, Graham Dillette, who I work with at the Masters, the golfer, my book was almost done, and I was at the Masters with him and telling him about the book, and he said, "Oh, you have to talk to Ray Whitney. Ray Whitney has the craziest story you've ever going to hear." And so I didn't even know Ray Whitney, but Graham gives me his number. I call him. He tells me a story that ends up being the last chapter in the book. Give it away. I don't want to wreck the book for you to think it's an immature book. It's about him shitting his pants during a game. Not all the stories are like that, I promise, but it's a very funny story about him eating his grandmother's cabbage rolls for Christmas and eating too many and having a very big disaster on the ice. He tells it much funnier than what I just said. But so that will happen.
Very relatable for all of us.
Yes,
So, you
yeah,
know,
sorry,
cabbage rolls,
sorry.
Ukrainian population.
That's not
we know.
that's not the content of the book, but there is some silliness like that in there. Quite often, you know, Kevin Bieksa, I call this 6 degrees of Kevin Bieksa because Kevin was one of the first guys I interviewed for the book at the Stanley Cup final. I've known him for a while, fan of his work on Hockey Night in Canada. He sat down and told me a great story for the book. And when he's done, he said, "Man, you got to talk to Darcy Hordichuk." And then, you know, I talked to Darcy Hordichuk and he says, "You got to talk to Todd Simpson." And it goes kind of like that, right? Where everybody knows somebody who's got a great story. My theory going into this was that even the most boring hockey player will have at least 1 or 2 great stories, right? Because when you play hockey, I think I say this in the book, it's such a gladiator sport. These guys are so tight and together for so long that stuff just happens, right? And so sometimes if I want a guy in a book, let's say Sidney Crosby, who was kind enough to write the foreword for this book and was in the first, when I talked to Sid, I had no idea what I'm going to get from him. And I worry sometimes when I go through, you know, it takes 2 months to set up me getting an hour with Sid or whoever it may be, Wayne Gretzky. And I'm always worried, well, what if they tell me a crappy story? Now do I tell Sid I'm not going to put a story in the book, right? But I don't think I've ever been disappointed by some, because they all, and Sid, by the way, has great stories, but almost everybody has at least one sort of awesome story.
Was there, sorry, Dave, just one more. Were there any stories in this book that the protagonist or the main character, was there anybody that was like, no, you can't, you had to kind of, you know, convince them that this needed to be in your book?
You mean, okay, where he said you can't put this in kind of thing, or you don't want to
Or
put
just
this in?
one of the stories that maybe originally the player or whoever the character
Right.
was didn't want it in, but then they eventually said, no, you can use it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think O-Dog was probably one of those, Jeff O'Neill, who, you know, gave me a story for the first book, and he's one of the great storytellers, and I get to sit beside him all the time, but I try to do original stories in here too. It's really hard with Overdrive and Spittin' Chicklets and these shows that are really into storytelling now and getting stories that haven't been told before. And in fact, there's a few in this book where I did, and then the person got on Spittin' Chicklets and told the story, and I was kind of cringing, going, "No, this is my story for the book." You can't be selfish like that.
That's Terry Ryan.
Well, a couple of the Terry Ryan stories in the book were on Spittin' Chicklets, and actually that's the flip side of it, where I listened to Terry on Spittin' Chicklets, and I said I want to do a story on this guy. He just sounds like the craziest guy out there, but I want to kind of do a story about his whole kind of life and blend all these stories together. It's one of my favorite chapters of the book. But O-Dog's story is about him getting in trouble, staying out in LA 2 different nights. One time he got invited by a couple of Kings players to a Playboy party when he had a game at the Playboy Mansion. So it tells the story of him going to the Playboy Mansion, getting in trouble, and then another night getting in trouble. There's a lot of stories about O-Dog getting in trouble, but he tells them with such a, you know, a wry smile. And I think he hesitated for a while about telling me. I think one of them he wakes up maybe with a strange woman, so that I think there was a bit of hesitation there, but I eventually coaxed him into it.
Well, the best part of some of O-Dog's stories is that his head coach at the time was somebody that's very familiar to us here in Winnipeg, that being Paul Maurice, of course.
Yeah.
So you can sort of, again, when you read the story in the book, and we encourage, of course, everybody to pick up the story and read it in detail.
I'll give a little hint, like, it's a long book, but he's basically wakes up in this, he goes out hard, wakes up in a strange apartment, and Paul Maurice is a disciplinarian. They have practice the next day, and he has to be on the team bus at 8 o'clock from the team hotel or whatever. And I don't know what time it is. It's 9:15 LA traffic. And he says, I have to go right now. I have to be on this bus. And the girl says, you have no chance. It's Los Angeles. So basically, half the story is about her whipping him through the streets in LA in his Camaro trying to make it before Paul Maurice. And she ends up squealing into the parking lot basically 10 seconds before, and Maurice is just staring at O as he gets on the bus, essentially. That's one half of the story. But yeah, Mo features in the Mo's O-Dog stories. I think he must have tormented, I don't know if there's a player that tormented Mo more than O in his career.
Yeah, it's their relationship, I'm sure, was especially because Jeff back then was maybe less mature than he is to these days.
It's so funny that he comes on our panel or on Overdrive and criticizes players for lack of effort. So, because that's exactly what O was. But I love him to death.
Which tells you just how incredible of a hockey player he was. Yeah. That he had the career he did, which was an impressive career by any measure. But the work ethic maybe wasn't there certainly at the start. As he got a little bit older, got a little bit more mature, maybe his approach changed to some degree. But it just goes to show you that as many of these guys that are total gym rats, diligent, disciplined, everything else, there's also a handful of them who are so talented that they don't need necessarily to be that way in the gym to succeed in the league.
The Phil Kessels and
stuff. Exactly right.
Amazing.
Just in terms of James, you've been in business a long time, you know a lot of people, but in terms of referrals, did you have to, like you said, Kevin Jackson would say, you have to speak to this person, but does that give you people know you, they may trust you, but having that sort of word of mouth from someone like Kevin Jackson saying, hey, you should talk to this guy, knowing that they put you in touch, does that make the stories easier to get from those players?
I think so. Well, first of all, I think it's easy to get stories from retired players that don't have anything to fear. But I always want to mix. One of the things I was determined to do in this book is get more current players, to get some of the young stars of here. There's Brady Tkachuk and Matthew Tkachuk are in the book, and a bunch of other current players.
Macklin Celebrini.
Thank you. I always forget who's in my own book. It's really bad. There's too many stories in the book. But that was important for me. And I was worried too that the modern player, doesn't go out. They sit in the room and play video games. And I think there's a feel for old time hockey that more stories came from the old days. But I found that these guys still have some pretty cool stories. And by the way, they're not all like crazy people going out hungover stories. Sometimes they're about great games. Sometimes they're about crazy teammates. There's a lot of heartwarming stuff in there. So it's trying to find a mix. But to answer your question, Dave, I think it helps if a player, I'll often say, do you mind reaching out to this guy? And is it okay if I call him?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to bother anybody. There's no gotchas in this book. I want everybody happy with their story that's in the book. So that happens a lot, but I guess the benefit of being on TSN all these years is either I've made relationships with people, or I guess people have seen me enough that they maybe trust me a little bit.
Well, that, for Marty Brown, who's been a guest on our show many times, we love having Marty on, and sometimes he'll find us, he'll be like randomly searching for internet so he can do the show from his car, it's great, but from his, how did you find out about his story? Because you wrote a great story about his first game and his last game in Buffalo.
Right.
And to me, I'm like curious, how would you find that out?
Well,
to know to write about it?
I think that, he's been beside me enough on the panel over the years that maybe he's talked about a little bit about the fight with Ray Emery. And I think that always stuck in the back of my mind as a story that I should tell in more detail. And when I asked him about that, he started saying, well, what was crazier was my first game in the NHL. And so Marty's chapter is about his first game in the NHL as a Sabre and his last game as a Sabre, which he didn't know would be his last game. He got traded. And thereby, the two craziest games of his career by far were his first game and his last game, which I thought just made for a perfect story. But again, I didn't milk a lot of the people that have been next to me, right? Because I've heard their stories before. Always try to ask that, make sure they haven't been in another book before I tell them here.
You talk about these stories, and you talk about sort of the difference in players now versus 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I'm sure it's the rise of social media and everybody having a phone and snapping a photo of a guy having a drink in a bar, 24 hours before a game, and the scandal that's going to cause, just from the personality aspect of the game. Aren't we missing out on all these sort of, everybody's so cookie cutter, everyone's so bland. It just seems like we're sort of taking a little bit of the soul away from the game. And it's not even strictly related to hockey. It's probably across all sports that you lose a little bit of the soulfulness and the humanity that sort of makes it such a compelling game.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I also think just the way the world is with social media, that, when somebody is outspoken, they usually end up getting blowback for it, which makes them say, well, why am I going to do this then, right?
I remember Joe Thornton. Remember when he was talking about, if he scored 5 goals in the game, and
right,
what he would do, which was, a humorous comment, and somebody ran with it. And
that's one of my beefs about the business we're in right now, is
right,
that when somebody will make a statement, there'll inevitably be some or multiple people that warp it around, and then you're basically asking people not to show personality. And if I was a player, I'd probably be the same. But I've been really fortunate, I find, that these guys who maybe you think are boring because you see them in our terrible intermission interviews where they say, let's get pucks deep or whatever, or guys who have reputations being boring like Sid, when you get them away from the ice, sitting down in a bar or restaurant or something, away from the media scrums where they tend to clam up, they are more than happy to share stories.
I was going to ask you, what is your favorite hockey cliche? We hear them all the time.
It's probably that. The one thing that I've noticed now is, have you noticed, this is more of an all athlete thing, but there's a lot of guys who start answers with yeah, no. And I want you all to try and listen to this now. If you listen to intermission and post-game interviews now, this is a trend amongst hockey players where, what happened out there in the second game? The power play didn't do so well. Yeah, no, and which makes no sense, right? Those two words together make no sense, but everybody uses them.
Well, I remember vividly, that when Sarah Orlesky, who of course is a superstar, is the queen of the city, when she was still doing the intermission interviews, and I believe it was Evander Kane that was interviewing her, and first of all, Evander's doing the interview shirtless, of course, because that was his persona back then. And I can't remember if it was which Jets player was back then. Maybe you guys can fill me in. Started the response to her question, and she's like, and he's like, yeah, man, and he's like, woman. It was just sort of like you sort of saw him just very briefly take down the curtain a little bit and showed a little bit of humanity, sort of slipped up that way. It was just sort of, I mean, it's we don't get these small snippets, but every now and then it peeks out a little bit.
I don't blame them though. Like I said, it's partly our fault. They've skated, they come off the ice for an intermission interview, and you're like, what went wrong in the second or what went right? They just want to get out of there and sit down and then get back to their games. So I've kind of been arguing on TSN lately that we should ditch them.
Right.
But it feels kind of bad if you interview somebody and then you don't run it. We did that the other night actually, with somebody on the Boston Bruins, because the other rule you'll see, if you're watching a Jets game and there's not a Jet being interviewed, it's usually because there's a rule that if the team is down by 2, we don't ask because they don't want to do it or they'll be miserable. So that's when you get the opposing team interviews, is when your team is down by 2 or 3 and we refuse, we don't ask them. But then I'm like, does anybody want to, who was it the other night? I don't know, it was some Bruins rookie we were doing Leafs game, and good kid, and I felt bad. I'm like, dude, is this a value of showing 2 minutes of this, when we could be talking about the game? So I think generally I would like to get rid of them, but then 1 out of every 20, maybe somebody will say something relevant that you wish you had. And obviously, if it's Mark Scheifele or if it's Sidney Crosby or somebody, you kind of want to hear from them. But besides that, there's a lot of garbage. I'll freely admit there are a lot of garbage interviews are.
I mentioned Macklin Celebrini earlier, one of the young stars. It's incredible what he's doing right now. And the big, I know that you've been talking about it on TSN. The debate right now is, are Celebrini and Bedard going to make Team Canada's Olympic team, right? Which is a good question, a good water cooler discussion to have, because these guys are at the top of the league in scoring right now. But without giving away the story, and it's earlier in the book, Macklin Celebrini's dad became close with Steve Nash. And I wanted to ask him that because that was unique about that story. You talked to Steve Nash, you talked to Draymond Green.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because obviously Macklin Celebrini, and you talk about your modern athlete. I mean, like, it's almost like from the age of 3 years old, he was destined to be a first overall pick. I think in the story you even mentioned that he said he was going to be the first overall pick when he was like 5 or 6 years old.
I said, when he was, Rick told me a story that when Macklin was, I think 4 or 5, they were playing wiffle ball in the backyard. And he was just crushing wiffle ball after wiffle ball. And at 5, he turned to his dad and uncle and said, someday people are going to pay to watch me do this, or something like that. Which is an unbelievable thing for a 5-year-old to say. And he's not cocky at all today. But yeah, I had heard, I think when he's, I get to host the World Juniors every year, and when Macklin was in the World Juniors, we ran a little bit of a feature, and I was aware of Rick Celebrity. If you don't know, is I don't know what the official title is, the head of fitness or whatever for the Golden State Warriors, works with Draymond Green and Steph Curry. I'd heard that he had trained Macklin in a very unique way, and so that was the story I wanted to tell. And I knew there was a relationship with Steve Nash. The story, basically, again, without giving up too much of the chapter, Steve Nash, when he was injured early in his career and was having all those back problems, he had another physio who had left and basically was referred to Rick. And Rick and Steve became best friends and spent summers together sort of figuring out a completely different way to train. And it was the way you moved your body and the steps you took and everything to optimize muscle movement. And so Macklin was growing up during this and would follow Rick and Steve to the gym essentially. And that's how Macklin learned to train. If you watch Macklin before a game, he does things that are different than any other player. In fact, Quinn Hughes of the Canucks skated with him last summer and basically said, teach me this.
Yeah.
I need you to teach me this. And, look, with Macklin, did Macklin have the God-given talent that he was going to be an NHL player anyway? Who knows, right? But he certainly gives a lot of credit to his dad and to Steve Nash for helping him develop him into that.
You talk about the relationships we have, and it's clear, right? Obviously, you can see it when you're on the panels or doing interviews, but from your perspective, what is the most fun you've had in this job, in media? I mean, me personally, I always look back at those commercials you guys shot during the Hangover ones, during the Kings one, like that to me it's just evident that you're having a lot of fun doing what you do.
I would say those things are probably the most fun. Like the panel's always fun. I do feel like the luckiest guy in the world to get to sit there and watch games with like guys I used to watch on TV, and it's endless fun. But the one thing I've loved about TSN is they will let us do dumb things. And anybody who knows me, I have really idiotic friends who are way funnier than me, but I grew up in that environment and very dumb humor. And so we did, well, the Hangover you mentioned was basically they wanted me to do a serious feature on Stanley Cup hangovers. But at the same time, we had a guy on the staff who sadly is now deceased who looked exactly like Zach Galifianakis from The Hangover. So I had this idea of doing a hangover thing. We shot it in 24 hours in LA. There's a lot of funny side stories to that. I was kind of the Ed Helms character. A lot of people think I look like Ed Helms too. I get that a lot. So I had that, the Mike Tyson tattoo on my face, which was the way I got the tattoo was it was stuck there for like 4 days. So I had to fly home with it and everything. But we went to this fancy dinner in LA after we shot the story, and I looked like the whitest, preppiest guy in the world, except I got this giant face tattoo. And I kind of forgot, right? Because you're just ordering a dinner, and all these waitresses were looking at me funny. And I went to the washer and realized I had an entire face tattoo on. But we did some songs to Puck Over Glass is something that a lot of people still, whenever there's a puck over glass penalty, tweet at me. And that was a thing where we were doing, I think we did a tote board one playoff year, way back when we would just do a tote board every time there was a puck over glass penalty, because there was tons of them. And I was driving home for work one night, and this tune just came into my head, and I decided to write a song about it. I was lucky enough to have a talented musician who's a friend of mine who did a podcast with me named Lester. I did a voice memo of this song and sent it to him, and he put it to music, and we made this really dumbass video with Bob McKenzie playing the cowbell, and then we've done 2 songs since then. We did one called Bad for Bedard, which was about tanking for Connor Bedard, which is another one of my favorites. It's just ridiculously stupid, but I have so much praise for my bosses that they allow us to do these things once in a while, because it is sports, and one of the philosophies I've always had is, if you can't, I was a news reporter before I was a sports guy. the greatest video editor, did Timmy leave? Who was here for a second, I saw him in the crowd. There he is back there. Tim Latham used to be my editor in Ottawa and in BC. Best news editor ever. I think that gave me the perspective when I went to sports that it's just sports. And as much as we take it seriously, we live and die with the Bombers wins and losses and the Jets wins and losses, that it is only sports. And we always have to remember that. And so to be able to have, you know, silly fun like that once in a while, it's a fine line, because you have to treat the game seriously, because we know how much you guys all care. And so we treat them seriously, but I think you've got to be able to have a little bit of fun once in a while.
What I find so fascinating about your job, James, I mean, on a very, very small level, you know, when we're doing our broadcasts, you know, I'm trying to multitask. We're watching the goal at the same time as listening to the conversation out of the other ear, and just trying to sort of figure it all out where the conversation is going to go next. Meanwhile, you're broadcasting on, you know, free agent frenzy, you're broadcasting on trade deadline day, and there are hundreds of things happening at the same time. I mean,
Or sometimes nothing.
More not. That's right. Okay, right. That's the flip side. I'll focus on the many things at this point in time. But you know, obviously you have a producer in your ear talking to you, but at the same time, you're still live on air, you know, trying to steer this massive ship. Right. How do you get good at that? How do you do that sort of thing? Because I think seriously, I think
He wants to learn.
For everybody at home who's watching you do it so seamlessly and with so effortlessly, I think that we sort of forget just how difficult it is to listen, talk, react, all basically in the same thought.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I don't know how good I am at it still, but those are the more challenging days of the year. Certainly trade deadline and free agent frenzy, especially when there's nothing going on, which is pretty much every trade deadline now. I think that GMs got smart about a decade ago, although the last couple have not been too bad, actually. There was a big lull there for about 3 years where I thought it was actually completely dead, and they were never. And I honestly think sometimes the GMs make the deals a couple of days before, only to watch us suffer on the actual days. But there have been times, I do admit, my brain starts to go to mush during those days. Quite often, you know, there's constant barking in your ear while you're talking. I'll be speaking about something and they'll say, okay, we have maybe an X on the line, somebody who got traded last year. Who did the Jets acquire last year?
Luke Shen.
Luke Shen. Okay, we got Luke Shen on the line right now. And in my head, I'll be going, oh, who traded for Luke Shen, right? And I don't have the ability to ask anybody because I'm live on the air. So, Luke, how do you feel about the deal? Oh crap, Winnipeg, yes, Winnipeg. So that will happen more often than not. We've had times where the guy hasn't known about the trade, which is really awkward. One of the Stewart brothers, Chris Rankin, got traded once, and I think he got traded from Buffalo to Minnesota. And they're like, Chris Stewart is on the line. I'm like, okay, we have Chris. How do you feel about the trade, Chris? And he's like, I don't know anything about it. You guys just called me.
Why did he think you were calling?
Yeah, exactly. And they just put him on right away. I'm like, okay, you've been dealt to Minnesota. And so you wait for his reaction live on air. So there's been some awkward moments like that.
Especially when you find out it's been traded for future consideration, not even for a draft pick or something.
I think Ron tugged out on the toilet once and we got him. So. But they're really fun days because the way I used to actually dread them because I was so worried about nothing happening or things going horrifically wrong on the show. But I've come to appreciate them because how often it's the only day we get everybody, all our guys in the studio. And I always say if nothing happens, you still have, I get to spend the day with all these really smart hockey guys, right? And Mike Johnson comes in, all the normal panelists, and it's in many ways, I kind of think, especially trade deadline, has kind of become this weird celebration of Canada. Because, you know, people tell me they book off work and such to sit and wait for a trade for a 7th defenseman for a 4th round draft pick, right? Because we're all sickos. And I love you because you're sickos, because you watch.
This might be moving ahead too fast, but because we're obviously talking about the second book here. But have you already thought about possibly a third book? Because I imagine since you finished writing the second book, you already have a lot of stories that could fill another book. Right?
Yeah, and it's weird. They didn't want to call it Beauties 2, right? Which I don't know. There's something in the book business that maybe sequels don't do as well or something. They wanted a different name, and that's why we added Certified Beauties. So I don't know how many things you can put in front of Beauties. I don't have an idea yet. I pondered the other night, sitting at the Hall of Fame, doing Hall of Fame Beauties and only doing Hall of Famers, which I think would be fun. It would be kind of a throwback to, you know, more old school days, although there's a lot of Hall of Famers now that just retired a few years ago. But that's always a fun night of the year for me when I get to see these guys backstage. So I thought maybe I'd do that, but I don't know. Maybe this will be, I don't pretend to be like, who's the Harry Potter author? I don't think there's gonna be 9 of these, but if you people keep liking them, then I'll
Good thing
keep doing them.
Good thing my daughter left, because if she heard you say, who's the Harry
What's
Potter
her name?
author,
Yeah.
she would be in
I
trouble right now.
live a sheltered life.
Well, at least, you know, talking about the Hall of Fame, and you know, we were having lunch yesterday, and you mentioned at least you were the one who called Joe Thornton Dumbo.
You know, that was, if you didn't hear this, Gary Bettman did a speech at the Hall of Fame, and there is a teleprompter, by the way. It's the only night of the year that I use teleprompter. We don't have it in our studio because we like to keep the conversation informal. Sports Center uses it, but I don't like using them at all. I just find it too rigid, and you'd rather just be conversational. It's a little more on the edge of a cliff when you don't have one, because if you forget what you're talking about, which I often do, you're kind of out there naked to the world. But there's a teleprompter. So Gary was reading his speech, and he had written Jumbo for Joe Thornton and said Dumbo instead. And it was one of the few times I felt really sorry for Gary Bettman, because when he walked backstage, I was the only one there, and his face was just ashen. And I could tell he was sick to his stomach, because that was just, you know, if you're gonna say a word wrong, which I often do, that's a terrible one to get wrong. And he walked straight down to Joe to apologize to him. Because it's Joe, I'm sure Joe was 100% fine with it. But that was a rough one. I've said plenty of dumb things on the air too, I'm sure.
There's so many good stories, and they're easily digestible, which is nice. That, you know, like you were saying.
After reading them.
Yeah, they are, though. It's perfect. Especially today's day and age, people who they have attention span. So it is a good read. But in terms of your favorite, what was your maybe favorite book?
It's such a good question. It's kind of like asking your favorite kid, which I do have a favorite kid. I can't tell the other two that. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. There's a few times where you're on the phone or sitting down with a guy and he tells his story, and I go, man, that's the exact reason I wrote this book. The first chapter is about Brady Tkachuk. I'll just tell it real quickly. Brady Tkachuk walks into the dressing room one day in Ottawa, and all his sticks are taped together with 20 rolls of tape, a typical immature hockey prank. And in his mind, he goes, Claude Giroux. I know it's Claude Giroux, because I guess they have this running thing between each other. So Brady goes into the stick room. This is before practice, hardly anybody in the room. He takes a hacksaw, you know, one of them, and he cuts. I didn't know this, but there's a place you can cut on the blade of the stick that if you cut like a couple millimeters in, it essentially ruins the stick, and the stick will break as soon as there's contact with the puck. So he does this with 4 of Giroux's sticks. They're about to go for practice. He figures Claude will break 4 sticks in a row. He'll get really mad because Claude has a temper. Everybody will laugh. Gets even for the prank. But Brady, being the captain, I think he gets called in the coach's office, gets sidetracked, forgets. And Claude must have grabbed another stick because nothing happens in practice. So the next day they're playing the St. Louis Blues. and they go on the power play midway through the first period, and Giroux comes out and one of his sticks snaps. As soon as he touches the puck, he goes back, gets another one, and tries to bat the puck out of the air and snaps. And Brady, by the way, sits on the bench and is not even remotely clued into any of this. And I guess there was a TV timeout, and they're playing the Blues, and Braden Shen's on the other team, and he's friends with Giroux. Giroux tells me that in his mind, he thinks that Braden Shen has messed with his sticks. So he starts F-bombing Braden Shen, saying, Shen, what'd you do to my sticks? When he says that, Brady sitting on the bench flews in and goes, oh my God, I got this guy's sticks and he's using them in an NHL game. And I'll just leave it there. There's about 3 or 4 different twists and turns that happen after that. But when he told me that story, I said, that's perfect for this book. There's another one where Darcy Hordachuk, who I mentioned, the reason Kevin DX told me to call it Darcy Hordachuk, there's about Darcy chapter is one of my favorites. There's about 20 stories in it, but this one he was playing in Florida for the Panthers and had a broken foot. And if any of you have the book in front of you, it's in the, you go to the picture section, you can see this. He's sitting having a beer with his neighbor on the inland waterway in Fort Lauderdale there. And the neighbor's got a Shih Tzu, and there's an alligator that keeps coming up the bank, and they think wants the Shih Tzu for an appetizer, basically. So this is a typical hockey player mentality. They take a fishing rod with a piece of chicken on it and lure the alligator up the bank. And Darcy, with a broken foot, jumps on the alligator. They duct tape its mouth. They put it in the back of his hatchback to drive out to the Everglades to release it, which is just mind-boggling in itself. At one point, it pops its head through the hatchback, and they both scream like as they're driving the car. But on the way, in typical hockey player fashion, Darcy says, "Why don't we stop by Luongo's house?" And they leave the alligator on Roberto Luongo's front porch. And there's a picture that's not in the book that I do have to myself of Luongo in his underwear looking through the glass behind the door, seeing this alligator on the front porch. So those are a couple of really silly ones, but those come to mind simply because when I wrote the book, those are the kind of stories I wanted. I think more than anything else, you want to take people behind the curtain, right? Of the stuff that you don't hear about, that hockey players tell each other all the time, but maybe don't tell other people. So those are a couple of them. Sorry, the proper answer to that question was probably, I did a chapter on the Gaudreau brothers. And the reason I did that is there was so much sadness with that story that I felt, that we all felt, and ceremony after ceremony last year, I just like, oh my God, this sad. I could not stand watching Guy and Jane, the parents, and Madeline and Meredith, the widows up there. And so I said, could I write a chapter that's, obviously it's sad because we know how it ends, but that is not, it's a beauties type chapter about them, where teammates and family members tell stories about them, like funny stories, lighthearted stories about what kind of people they were. And in many ways, I think that's kind of the soul of the book, I think, is that you get some really great, funny stories that hopefully you can smile and laugh. And I was kind of thinking about their kids saying, when they get old enough, they can read this and say, oh, my dad was a pretty funny guy, and my dad did this. And so that's probably the most important chapter of the book, if not the one that means things.
Yeah. When he was an active player, it's one thing to have a relationship with players when they retire, but you and Roberto Luongo had a close relationship, even when he was an active player.
Right.
How did that come about? How do you foster that sort of relationship? Because I think your colleagues would also admit that was a fairly unique circumstance between you and Roberto Luongo.
And I don't have a lot of hockey player friends. I don't try to, back when I used to host the draft, I used to get the players' numbers just so I could get information from them and do my job properly. And at a certain age, I think when I turned 50, I feel really creepy asking 18-year-olds for a phone number. I'm not gonna do this anymore. And so I'm close to very few players in the game. I also think that, in order to go out and criticize or do what you do properly, you should really be good friends with people. But Roberto and I kind of fell into it one night where I never knew him at all. I didn't really have any relationship with him. And once again, this came from my boss asking me to do a serious story about backup goalies and what it's like to be a backup goalie. And I ended up getting in contact with Jamie Clennon, who was Roberto's backup at the time in Florida. And somewhere along the way, I decided it would be funnier if we did a spoof where the backup actually hated the starter and he wanted to kill him. And there's this silly famous scene you can find on YouTube of Jamie running over Roberto with the Zamboni, where we use this really fake dummy that goes flying through the air. I think I used it in 4 different stories, but Roberto was so great. Like, I had never spoken to him. We flew down to Florida to shoot this. There was a practice. We were going to shoot it after practice, and he didn't really know anything about it. And basically, I call him over and say, "Hey, Roberto, it's James from TSN. So we're going to shoot this scene where Jamie's going to run over you with a Zamboni. You got to look really scared. And we got this dummy." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm game for anything." And so out of that, I think I ran into him at a game in Vancouver once when he wasn't playing. And he said, "Why don't we do another one?" And it kind of went from there. He started giving me ideas. We did one about him and Corey Schneider. There was a big controversy about who should be the #1 goalie. And, you know, it was this massive, serious story in Vancouver, and they were really good friends. It was being built as this rivalry. So Roberto and Schneider called me and said, why don't we do a spoof where, you know, we're fighting each other, but it's not. And it was really, really stupid and silly again, but that was Roberto's idea, not mine.
You guys have a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. So looking for guidance from the McNally Robinson people. Is this a good plan? Okay, they're gonna need the thumbs up.
Just in terms of the state of the game, what are your thoughts, how, you know, hockey is and, you know, the idea of potentially adding more teams?
Oh, I don't like that idea at all. I worry about just the, you know, there's already enough players. First of all, anybody who makes the NHL is amazing. But, you know, as far as the true quality of players, I'm not sure if there's enough on some third and fourth lines. So we need 2 or 3 more teams. But I think the state of the game is awesome. I'm lucky enough to be doing the Olympics in, which is going to be weird, by the way. It's like a combined Sportsnet TSN panel. So I'm on with the X and Elliott and others from in, I don't even know if they've announced that yet. That's in Italy.
That seems like great news right now.
It's out now, but I can't wait for that Olympics, like to see Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon, some of the stuff we saw at Four Nations. I do really think the game is as good as it's ever been. So I can't wait for that. And sorry, Mark Scheifele, of course. Josh Morrison.
Yeah, well, and that leads nicely into my question. I was gonna ask you about the Jets. And obviously you've been in town and you're in town for the Grey Cup and obviously this event as well. What has kind of stood out to you about your time here and in terms of Jets fans and Bombers fans? Because you already knew this. We have some of the most passionate fans.
You're gonna think I'm sucking up, and I don't really say this, but I was saying today, we were on Overdrive talking about all the sellouts for the Bombers. I think you could make a case that as far as fan support, this is the greatest sports city in Canada, right? Like, I can't think of another one that's better. When you think of how crazy the Jets and loud the Jets fans are, and the Bombers fans easily, you know, with all the sellouts, are the best fans in Canada, you could say now. That you could definitely make that case. And I wish the Bombers, honestly, we do like new things. So was I sick of the Bombers going to 5 straight Grey Cups? I mean, there's a little bit of that. Am I excited that there's 2 new teams? Well, 1 new team and 1 kind of new team in this year? Yes. I wish the Bombers though had won that 3rd Grey Cup so we could officially call them a dynasty, because I think they deserve that. And the Jets, look, people ask me who I cheer for all the time. I get accused of being a Sens fan because I'm from Ottawa. I'm really not. I'm definitely not a Leafs fan, although it's hard because my kids are grown up now in north of Toronto, and so they're kind of Leaf fans. It's weird for me. But I do really cheer for kind of all the Canadian teams to do well, because it's just better for us. And I can't wait to get a Jets final at some point. Would be spectacular.
I think that's music to the ears of everybody that's in this audience right now. As I said, I think we have a few minutes for some questions. If anybody's got a question in the audience, they raise your hand and holler it out, and we'll go from there.
So talking about what you were already talking about with current players and how Sidney and we're all really tired of, how successful do you think Brady and Matthew will be with their Wingman podcast? And will they be limited and not like these big chicklets because they still have teammates, they still have coaches, they still have expectations, and like this idea that the dressing room is also a sanctuary, you can't tell just anybody your story.
Right. I think they'll be good, first of all, because they are real characters. Matthew has a chapter in the book too. The book is kind of bookended with Brady and Matthew in a way. And they're great, but I think you're right. I think it's so much easier. I mean, Travis isn't retired, and he seems to do okay. Travis Kelce, sorry. But he's also got a lot to talk about. Yeah, exactly. So I think they'll be good, but like you say, I don't think you'll ever get the true, I think when players are done, like a Jeff O'Neill, one of the reasons Jeff is so popular, because he can say if he didn't like somebody, right? Or if he didn't like a teammate or didn't like a coach. Yeah, exactly. So I think they'll be really good with that asterisk that they won't be able to give you 100% of full minutes. When Brady told me that story that I just told you guys, I was kind of shocked he told me, because it is kind of looks rinky-dink that this would happen at the National Hockey. But I think if they won the game like 7-1, Brady had like 4 points because he played guilty as hell. if they had lost the game, that story would have died.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, that's a phrase you use there, playing guilty.
Yeah.
That's not something that you hear very often anymore, but that's sort of a lost art in the NHL where, playing guilty is when players maybe went out the night before, they had a few on. That's when, I was saying before about sort of losing a little bit of the character of the game. The idea of playing guilty is it's a non-starter, it seems nowadays, whereas back in the day, it was sort of commonplace that a lot of times teams and players were, skating out some alcohol from the night before, and, either a morning skate or in the game itself.
Yeah, I think Noodles and Lo were talking about that, about the Leafs today on Overdrive, saying they got to all go out and get drunk on the road trip. And that just doesn't happen anymore, because like I said, they don't do that. They go play video games in their rooms. So, but yeah, it happened. There's a lot of stories. I think Aaron Ward, who used to be on our panel, told me that in the Stanley Cup Final 2006, when Carolina beat Edmonton, that he had had a really bad game, and that the night before, whatever, game 4 or 5 of the final, he went out and had 10 beers and played the best game of the playoffs, which is mind-boggling to me because I'm the biggest lightweight ever, and I couldn't host the Grey Cup if I had 3. So yeah, but that stuff happens.
What was your first impression of covering the Masters, and what's like the best about covering the Masters?
So this is not a plug. You were talking about beauties. I am writing another book. This was not my idea, but the publisher HarperCollins asked me to write a book about the favorite events that I've been at. And by the way, it's really a lot harder to write about yourself than it is to write about others. I don't like writing about myself. I did it with the guy on the left. But I am putting that together now, and was trying to write the other day a chapter about the Masters, which is one of my, people ask me my favorite events of the year. It's usually, the World Juniors is tough to beat for me because I love hockey and I just think it's the best hockey we see. The Masters is right there though, because I do love golf. Anybody who follows me knows that that's my favorite thing to do when I'm not working. Not that I'm great at it, but I love doing it. And it is one of the, is anybody been by any chance in this room to Augusta? It's one of those few places in the world that exceeds your expectations. And almost everyone I know who's been there has said that. That, most, because of Instagram and such, you want to go to some place in the world and usually it's a bit of a letdown because you've kind of seen it all before. But the Masters is kind of like this weird world that exists. When I first went there, I always envisioned, I never thought I'd get to go to the Masters growing up in Ottawa, but I always thought you'd drive down some winding country lane and you'd come across Magnolia Lake at Augusta National. And the truth is, it's off the seediest strip, American strip ever. In fact, I think it might have closed, but there was a Hooters.
It's on daily Hooters.
Yeah, there was a Hooters like 300 meters from Magnolia Lane. And the first day I was driving in, I was all so excited. This was 2002, my first Masters. And there was a Hooters girl, scantily dressed with a hula hoop on the front lawn, going, "Come on in for our Hooters Masters special." And I was sitting there going, "This is not what I envisioned." I didn't mind, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But it's a truly special place.
Have you got to play it yet?
I did.
Yes.
One of the jerkiest moves that I pulled. Are there any golfers in the crowd?
Yeah.
So, you know how sometimes you go out and you get paired with like a couple of random people you don't know? This is my jerkiest move by far. I always will say to them, "So what's a favorite course you ever played?" And they'll inevitably say, "I don't know what a great course is around here." And they'll go to country club or something, or they'll say like TBC in Toronto or something, or maybe a course down in Michigan or something they play. And inevitably they say back, "What about you?" And I just go, "Augusta National." There's a draw that happens on the Monday after the Masters where about 20 people get to play with the Sunday pins on Monday. And I won about 8 years ago now. And honestly, one of the craziest favorite days of my life. Never been more nervous on the first tee than standing, because you're sitting there going, you can't believe you're actually there. So it's special.
Super Bowl 36, was that your first Super Bowl you covered?
I'm not good with the numbers, so which one was it?
Patriots and Rams. Right off the top.
Yes, 2002 was my first Super Bowl.
How many
That's impressive.
How many have you covered, and was that one of your favorites?
Yeah.
or-
I said though today that I actually prefer Grey Cup week. I love the Super Bowl. The game's always great, but if you were to take the whole week, there's something about Grey Cup that's just so, homey and Canadian, and fans coming here. And the Super Bowl is just so big and so corporate. And it's not like I'm getting invited, to all the, parties and such. I'm less of a nobody than I'm here down there. I'm a real nobody. And I just find, I don't know, it's kind of too big and glitzy for me. The Grey Cup is, I don't know, I just find the Grey Cup is this great piece of Canadian. But I do love the Super Bowl. That was my first, I think I'm 14 now. And that was an amazing one because it was a great Super Bowl. The Patriots were nobody back then. I think the Rams were 13.5 point favorites. They won on a Vinatieri field goal. And I saw the picture of me interviewing Vinatieri after with the Super Bowl trophy, which was really cool. I almost got a Tom Brady interview. I think I wrote this in one of my early books. Brady was doing, I think, ESPN. We were next to him and he started to walk and he caught my eye and I was like, I was going to yell, Tom, TSN. And he nodded like he's coming. And then as he got a couple more steps, he just got swept up in this mass of media and PR people. And he kind of turned to me and shrugged. And that was as close as I ever got to an exclusive Tom Brady interview after the Super Bowl.
With the riders being in town for the Grey Cup, I can't help but think about their nutrition and kind of how you and him were really good buddies, and you really, that's one thing I remember about you so much is how you did tributes to him all the time.
Right.
Just the fact that he's not around for this Grey Cup.
It's sad, yeah.
It's just sad.
I'm really happy though. When I had to do the World Cup in Qatar, it was the one Grey Cup that I missed. And Duthie had already been sick a little bit, but was back at work. And I asked him, I said, it was the last one in Saskatchewan. What was that, 22? Would have been 22, right?
Yeah.
And I said, if you could get Dutch to do it, and for him to be able to present the Grey Cup in Saski was one of the coolest things. He was great. I've told some of these stories before. I hosted Sports Center / Sports Desk with Dutchie for 2 years. And it was 2 of the funnest years of my life because he was so smart and funny and off the cuff, and he would say the most ridiculously inappropriate things on air and somehow get away with them. A story I always tell, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but it's Dutchie, so we used to do baseball highlights in the summer. There's nothing else going on besides, there's no CFL games, you just have baseball all night for an hour. And so I was bored and I invented this thing called Home Run Call Theme Night, which was a stupid idea, but it was just entertaining for me. So basically every night I'd pick something like types of cheese. And every time there was a home run in my highlight pack, I'd yell Gouda or whatever, right? It was just really stupid. So one night I did towns in Saskatchewan for Dutchie. And I'd saved this one for last, figuring he would say something. Like I did Porcupine Plain and a couple of others. And the last one comes up and I'm like, whatever it was at the time. Mark McGuire, deep to left field, Big Beaver. And without missing a beat, he goes, been there. If only he could get away with that on TV. One night I did things my nana never said. So my grandmother never said, who had passed away. And so I was saying things like, trendy words at the time, right? So one of them, I was like, deep to left field, bootylicious. And he goes, I tell you one thing, she said, Dutchie-licious. And I said, this is my dead grandma you're talking about. And he goes, she wasn't dead back then. So and maybe it's better that was back then before YouTube and Twitter, where he would have got annihilated, but he just had an ability to say inappropriate things with a beautiful wink in his eye, and God, I love that guy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking James Duthie.
Yeah, go ahead.
What was your favorite story? What was your favorite story to take round? What's the best story of getting a story?
Oh, the best story of getting a story. Okay, give me the book for a second. I know there's a couple from the first one, but let me think if there's one for this one. By the way, if somebody had a question for me that they didn't want to ask or didn't have time to ask, you can ask me while I'm signing the book. I'm more than happy to do it. I got a call from, it was for the chat, I think it was Rasmus Anderson of the Flames, when I was doing the chapter on the Gaudreaus, and I've been waiting to get him because I knew he had a good story. And I was on the air doing a pregame show, probably the Hall of Fame game last year. And like Jeff O'Neill was talking, and I was on the air, and I saw Rasmus's number come up on my phone. I'm like, I can't miss this call because I've been playing tag with him for 3 weeks. So I pressed the answer button on the phone while Jeff was on the air. And I have a button where I can talk to the producer. I hit that button and said, don't cut to me for a second. And I also have a cough button that cuts off my mic. And I grabbed the phone and started talking to Rasmus while we were doing a live panel on TV. And I just said, Rasmus, I'm just live on TV right now. Can you hang on there for 2 seconds, whatever. And then I think we went to commercial break, and he was still on there, and I did like a 4-minute interview with him during the commercial break to get the story out. I ended up having to call back later, but that's the first one that comes to mind, is how desperate I was that I actually answered a phone call for the book live. My bosses probably would be super thrilled about it. Anyway, thanks again so much. Thank you so much to these guys again for coming out, and like I said, we'll go over and happy to sign and personalize all your books and sign them to whoever you want, yourselves, your wives, your husbands, your kids, your lovers, anybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Duthie.
Yes, like I said, we're going to go on to the signing portion. If you just leave your seats for one quick moment while we transfer James over to the signing table by the cash desk, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you to all of you for showing up today, and for those here and online. Big thanks to our hosts as well. That'll be Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and Drew Mindell. Over to legal to James Duthie. Thank you so much.
Certified Beauty.
I actually got a whole box for you.